if we go back here and start to look to block these things in a bit, this guy looks like he's going to have pretty skinny shoulders. So let's pull that out wider, and then give him some muscle. So I like to start on the back just because this is a pretty difficult area to unpick for a lot of us. So let's start with the lumbar muscles of the back. Which, I mean, the problem with figuring out the lumbar muscles is they are like, it's a collection of a lot of muscles. So we kind of have to simplify through here. And this is how I would simplify it. There's like an egg that leans outwards, something like that. And then there's a cylinder that plugs straight into the sacrum. So the thing that I would mention, like, I guess most strongly with these muscles is just like, man, I mean, just acknowledge the fact that they exist, because this is a huge muscle mass, and the latissimus covers it, but it's a thin muscle, right? That's the personality of that muscle. Whereas these muscles they're part of our core muscle set, right? Our core muscles would be everything between our rib cage and our pelvis, right? Where in terms of our skeletal structure, all we have is this spinal column. So you need a thick wall of muscle to keep that strong, and this is this is the muscle mass that's operating on the back. So we're saying that this mass, there's many muscles, but let's generalize and say it originates on the hip and it inserts. It's going all the way up the back. But in terms of how it influences the mass, I'm only interested in it down here. So it originates there, inserts on the rib cage somewhere, pulls that point to that point, and so it does what? Yeah, pulls the body back this way, right? But which you go, okay, well, that's not an action that, that we do that much, but it's also just strengthening all of that, right? So like, let's say I bend forwards. Well, here, like my abs are the opposite, are the antagonistic muscle to this, right? So maybe my abs pull my body over, but here I have a problem with gravity that's pushing me down the whole time. So I actually need something that's going to hold me up, otherwise I'm face planting, right? So these muscles are actually going to be active in there as well, just to hold my body upright. So these are super significant, super important muscles, right? If you didn't have these, you'd be flopping all over the place, and yet time and time again we're just kind of ignoring them. Now here I've just roughed it in on one side. Let's mirror it over to the other side, but it could be that in life, just one side is active. And if just one side is active, it's going to spin the body, right? So if just this side fires, you imagine the muscle starting from roughly here, inserting roughly there, pulls at that point to that point, and it's going to spin the body around. So that's another thing that it can do. So something like that. If you're looking at the body from the side, these muscles are impacting the silhouette. Right? Yes, the latissimus is on top of that, but in terms of dominant form, that's what you're looking at through there. Another form that I think is worth some real in-depth study is this, which is the serratus anterior. And you'll be pretty familiar with this as like the muscle that gives the fingers to the side of the body, right? We see those digitations on the side. But what we don't see, or we don't see directly, is the fact that it is going to the bottom of the scapula through here. Right? And it goes all the way up here, but up here, we're not going to see it in life unless the arm is raised, maybe. So we have this muscle mass that goes from the inside border of the scapula through there. That's its point of origin, and it inserts onto the side of the rib cage through here. So when it contracts, pulls that to that, which is what? Yeah, it's a punching muscle, right? It's that. Now, the personality of this muscle is that it's pretty thick and pretty rounded. So, like, I think most people, if they're thinking about, okay, how would I get that strong masculine V shape to the torso? Well, you can work your deltoids. If you happen to have narrow hips, then great. But part of it is the serratus muscle. It's not the lats. They're a small part of it, but like this bulge that on some people you'll see out there is coming from the serratus muscle. So like really important muscle to get your head around. And not only that, like this, the line that it forms through here, right? It's basically like a line that comes off of the a line that comes off of the scapula there. It's normally a bit further over. So something like that. You can see that in life all the time. And because the scapula is a mobile platform, that line is going to follow the scapula, right? As the scapula comes forwards through there, right, the scapula will move around the rib cage through there. That's going to leave us with like 3 inches of space, and that line is going to follow it. And then you're just going to be left with exposed ribs underneath that. You know, or if the arms do that, the scapula wings out, that line follows it. So as soon as you're dealing with motion of the arms, this line, if you can see it, which I would say 80% of the time that you can, becomes pretty important. And then you see that area there between the serratus and the lumbar muscles. Like, that's pretty much a dead zone. Again, this is another time when the latissimus will kill you, because you'll go, oh, it's latissimus. Yeah, but that's thin. Peel that off, and it's ribs. So you'll see ribs all the time underneath there, especially if someone's doing that. So again, like if I was shot sculpting something like that, I would go like, okay, well, the story of that bending forwards is that the ribs are going to be exposed, and that's, you know, I'll just go bonk straight for that, and then here I look for the creasing and the fat and the lack of definition, and just, you know, have that as my number one priority, let's say. So through here, let's mirror that, and then this final deep mass that we'll look at is the mass of the rhomboids. So this is something like this. It's coming from the spine, coming from the 7th cervical vertebrae, going down to the 5th thoracic vertebrae. That doesn't really matter. It's just coming from that section of the spine, grabbing hold of the scapula, so pulls that point to that point, which is what? Yeah, like touching your elbows behind your back, right? So that's your rhomboids. It'll be your trapezius as well, but like if we're focusing on simplicity, then we just go to the very basic forms. That's the skeleton at its simplest level, and then we can layer up the rhomboids on top of that, and then we can layer the trapezius up on top of that, and then the skin on top of that. By the time you've hit all of these levels, if you're playing within the right way, you end up with something that feels like, Jesus, that's like really complex. But it's not. It's just an acknowledgement of each layer and the impact that it has. And each layer is fundamentally pretty simple. So the rhomboids, again, just like generally understudied, but this line at the bottom of the rhomboids, you can find that in life, I would say 6 times out of 10, something like that. And then in a skinny person, we'll look at this, I think, when I put some flesh on this, is you can break this area down into 3 planes if you want. Right, you'd have the rhomboid plane through there, you have the plane of the scapula there, and then at the top, through there, you have the plane of the trapezius. 3 very clear planes that you can find, and that works great for blocking in like delicate or skinny characters or something like that. Oh, sorry, let me backtrack just for a minute. One thing I'd want to talk about on the serratus, if we go back to that muscle checklist, what is the pattern, where does the pattern break? This is, I think, a good example of a way of looking at that, because the pattern is that it's made up of all of these separate fingers, right, that point towards the scapula, something like that. So that, you know, I'm sure you're all super familiar with that form, but there is a tendency to make all of those lines horizontal. Right, so the pattern is you have all these separate fingers that are wrapping around the body, but the way the pattern breaks is that line changes as it goes up. So you're not hitting parallels as you move up the body. Like that's a pretty small detail, but like all of these details add up, right? It's if you're always thinking about that, or if you're always not thinking about that, just that little bit of thought will make a huge difference between something that feels naturalistic and something that doesn't quite hit that mark. So if we spin around to the front, there's the abs give us a really clear example of this. So abs coming from the rib cage, going down like a bullet shape. That would be my personality of the abs, right? And having that as a bullet allows me to avoid parallel lines through there. And so they're originating on the rib cage through here, right? They're actually covering that skeletal arch through there, and they're inserting down there on the pelvis. So when it pulls that point to that point, it does what?
Slices.
Right, here. And then if this point doesn't move, If this point doesn't move, hips go up, right? So like if you lie on your back and you do leg raises like that, you'll start to feel it in your abs. What happens if neither of those points move? Tension, right? Which a lot of, well, I would say most muscles, unless you're like a very tense person, have a natural amount of relaxation, a natural amount of elasticity in them. So the abs have this, right? If we look at them from the side, they're certainly not a straight line, right? They're generally, that movement is generally pushing forwards, and then at some point it breaks and comes down like that, right? The forward push through there is coming from the spine itself, actually pushing forwards. So they're not a straight line. But when that muscle tries to straighten, and that point doesn't move and that point doesn't move, that straightens up, which is going to compress the inside of the body, right? That's going to expel something from the body, either upwards or downwards. It kind of depends on what other things are contracted. So like if you were coughing or something like that, that straightening up is going to, I can feel it on my abs, it's going to expel air out of the front. If that was locked off and I was on the toilet, then it would be expelling stuff out of the bottom. So it's kind of like, it's basically, it's creating pressure in the body that is releasing stuff from the body. It's a pretty vital function of the abdominals. And it's kind of related to their function in breathing, right? So if you think about what breathing is each of the ribs articulate from the spine, right? And so as I breathe in, you know, we mentioned like the anterior and posterior chains before. You could also describe a respiratory chain, right? A chain that's involved in breathing. So for example, if I do this, you can see the tension there as this muscle is grabbing hold of my rib cage, starts to lift the rib cage up. And then each of the intercostal muscles through there will bump, 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 do their bit to lift up the ribs and pull them out, right? The intercostal muscles being, like if you're eating barbecue spare ribs, that's the intercostal muscles of a cow. Dissecting your meat is quite a useful way to get your head around some anatomical forms. Well, anyway, so yeah, we have that chain, right? Boom, that's pulling all of that up. So as I breathe, ribs come upwards and outwards. That means that the abdominals are getting stretched, right? So we have compression all the way through here, and we have extension down here. So then if I want to breathe out, especially if I want to breathe out with force, the abdominals will pull that back down, and that will pull the rib cage down. Good way of looking at that is like if you watch MMA, because oftentimes one guy will be pinned to the ground and you can see him struggling for air, and you just see the abs just like crunching to try and get that air in and out of the body. So they're involved in breathing through there. Incidentally, the muscles in the back are involved in breathing as well, because I mean, you think like they're grabbing hold of the ribs. So anything that starts somewhere else and grabs hold of the ribs, it's probably going to be involved in breathing. I didn't think about it that much, and then when my son was born, I saw like there's a muscle mass that I don't generally teach called the serratus posterior. Gives you like these cat whiskers on the back, and you do see it in life. And when he was born, they put him on his front, and he was screaming away. And suddenly, I saw like just that muscle, because you think like if you had a muscle mass on the back of the rib cage, you know, you're originating from the spine, you grab hold of the ribs, boom, of course, it's going to open it up, and it's pretty amazing to watch. You know, I mean. Childbirth was a more amazing thing, but that particular anatomical nuance was particularly interesting, I thought. Let's